So, what did this study reveal? It revealed that an all-meat diet works wonders, and that such a diet can sustain near optimum health. So let's see what happened. How did this study work? Hello, friends. It's the Carnivore Rabbi. A rabbi is a teacher and source of inspiration. That's what this channel provides for carnivores of all faiths. Welcome. One of the criticisms we hear so often as carnivores is that there are no studies on the carnivore diet, no research. And this seems like a major problem, right? Because the vast majority of nutritionists and doctors and talking heads on the media promote fruits and vegetables. So how do we make our case? There are a couple of ways to respond to this. First is that most nutrition studies mean nothing. They're epidemiological, they're just observation. And remember what you learned a long time ago, correlation is not causation. And most of the studies that are done really mean nothing. A second approach, and also I like this one too, is to say, actually, you're wrong. We do have lots of studies, real world studies. People have lived on meat for centuries, millennia, and we're here. So it's a study in the real world. It's real life. Our existence, our lives prove the effectiveness of the carnivore diet because we haven't had processed food for hundreds of thousands of years, but we have had meat. But there is also a third way to make our case. And there is actually a real good carnivore study that has been done. And it was done almost 100 years ago. Truly incredible scientific study. And it was done 100 years ago with the cutting-edge laboratory tests of the time. And it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Now you might be thinking, Rabbi, that's meaningless. It's 100 years old. What can that tell us? Well, actually, I trust the older studies much more than newer ones because these older studies were less likely to be driven by an agenda. Now we know that the medical associations like JAMA and the ADA, American Diabetes Association, they are captured by pharmaceutical interests. But weren't 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there was much less entrenched bureaucracy and money interests driving research. And remember also 100 years ago, the culture wasn't as anti-meat as it is today. So the kind of cultural bias that would affect the researchers as it does today, that wasn't nearly as strong. So this study is a really good one. So what did this study reveal? It revealed that an all-meat diet works wonders, and that such a diet can sustain near optimum health. So let's see what happened. How did this study work? It all started in 1906 with a man named Wilhelm Stefansson. He was an explorer and an anthropologist. In fact, he taught at Harvard. And in 1908, he went and lived in the Arctic with the Inuit, commonly known as the Eskimos, for 5 years. Initially, he had supplies and he had Western food, his typical diet, brought with him. And he mixed that typical food with what the Inuit ate. But then in 1908, a ship with several other explorers and anthropologists and supplies and food for Stefansson was supposed to come, but the ship didn't make it. So Stefansson had to turn and rely on hunting and working closely with the Inuit to eat and survive. He didn't have his Western food anymore. So what happened is he took to the all-meat Inuit diet. He began to follow exactly what the Eskimos did. And he noted in his diaries at the time that the Inuit diet consisted of 90% meat and fish. They had occasional berries. Inuit would often go 6 to 9 months a year eating nothing but fatty meat and fresh fish. And they were perfectly healthy. Tall, no tooth decay, no obesity or disease. Stefansson believed that it was the high saturated fat content of the Inuit diet. As he noted, about 70 to 80% of total Inuit calories came from fat. And that was the mechanism that allowed them to thrive. And he saw how Inuit hunters prized the fat. Upon hunting a caribou, the Inuits would savor the fat deposits behind the eye and the jaw, in addition to the organ meats and the shoulder, which was fattier on caribou. Incredible. The other stuff, the high protein stuff, they would give to the dogs, which makes sense. Dogs need less fat than we do. They thrive on protein. I've seen that when I feed my own dogs. I'll give them a little bit of leftover meat if I'm having lunch, and I have to be very careful to make sure it's not the fatty cuts because that gives them a tummy ache. Now, what Stefansson was finding was the opposite of what people in America at the time, like John Harvey Kellogg, were pushing. You know this story, and if you haven't, look at what Old Guy Carnivore has done. These religious fanatics like Kellogg believed that raw vegetables and grains were virtuous, and meat and saturated fats were sinful. Western doctors also believed that the Inuit diet was vitamin deficient and dangerous. And as he journeyed through the Arctic, Stefansson saw a different perspective, as the Inuit population, he observed, was utterly thriving. Then he got back from his time with in the Arctic, and this is when it just started to get going. He talked extensively about his diet when he returned. He met with professors at Johns Hopkins, which was then the world's leading medical school, and the Mayo Clinic, telling them about what he ate and how the Inuit thrived. And he was truly frustrated, like many of us are, by the conventional dietary recommendations of the time, people like John Harvey Kellogg. They always said fruits and vegetables and lean meats, but he saw how critical fatty meat is. And so in 1928, he got permission and support to undertake a year-long experiment at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. He and one other participant, another explorer named Karsten Anderson, committed to an all-meat diet for an entire year. For the first 2 weeks, they stayed in the hospital under intense laboratory observation. And then, afterward, they would come in several times a week for an array of tests. And they actually had paid observers who followed them during the week and watched them to make sure they followed the all-meat diet. Now, they each got sick once. And they both got sick when they were eating very lean cuts of meat, per the protocol of the experimenters. Otherwise, they were incredibly healthy the entire time. Their blood tests showed consistent, healthy results. One great line that I found from the researchers concludes, their bowels remained normal, except that their stools were smaller and did not smell. They took in between 2,000 and 3,100 calories per day and derived an average of almost 80% of their energy from animal fats and almost 20% from protein, the 80-20 ratio. And what kind of meat did they eat? According to the notes on the experiment, they ate steak, roast beef, brains, tongue, calf, and liver. And they ate liver only once per week. The experiment was incredibly successful. But unfortunately, we know that it did not have much of an impact. John Harvey Kellogg and the low-fat anti-meat movement eventually won over the American public and nutrition science. But Stefansson's diet resembles what many of us do. In fact, he later called it a Stone Age way of eating. And he kept it up his entire life. High fat, low carb, primarily meat. He wasn't a 100% carnivore like some of us are, but he was probably 90%. In fact, later in life, he was an incredibly accomplished man. Later in life, he was notorious for eating globs of butter on a spoon. And if you look at pictures of him later in life, he was incredibly fit, smooth, clear, and insightful. And he's remembered not only for the carnivore diet, but as a groundbreaking explorer and anthropologist. He inspired Owsley Stanley, the bear, one of the early champions of the carnivore diet. And his books about living with the Eskimos did reach a popular audience. Unfortunately, as we know, the experiment and the message about diet did not become widespread. So why do you think that is? Leave a comment, leave your opinion in the comments below. I'd be curious, why didn't this spread to the public? My guess is that he was not as power-hungry a scientist in the same way Ancel Keys was. Now, you know who Ancel Keys is, right? He's the man responsible for demonizing meat and fat and cholesterol, manipulating scientific studies, and essentially promoting the modern food pyramid. Old Guy Carnivore has done a deep dive into this wicked man. I suggest you watch what he did. But Stefansson was so different than Ancel Keys. He was an explorer, more playful, more adventurous, more interested in having creative ideas rather than forcing those ideas down other people's throats. And unfortunately, this is the rabbi and the person coming out in me, that sometimes wicked people are much more forceful in their message than right teachers are. Unfortunately, that's human nature. There's that great line from poet William Butler Yeats: "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." Now, interestingly, Stefansson didn't lack conviction. He just didn't have the passionate intensity that Ancel Keys did. Fortunately, he left a body of work, and as we have learned, his message from almost 100 years ago foreshadows exactly what we are doing today. So click the link below I'm including if you want a copy of the 1929 article from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, on this study. I scoured the internet and found the exact article documenting this study from 1929. So click on the link that's the pinned comment if you'd like a copy of it. I'm delighted to share it with you. See you next time.